Now, today's moderator for this closing session is Fereeha Idrees, who is actually the broadcast journalist, writer, and political analyst. And this is dialogue between both of you. And this is actually 30 minutes dialogue. And the topic is all about the future of Afghanistan, the current scenario, and also the overall geopolitical changes. Over to you, Fereeha, for this closing session for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Aswar. It has been a very informative session, and a very warm welcome to you, Mr. Omar Sarmad. We're very happy to have you here. Obviously, we are talking about an all-inclusive Afghanistan, a new Afghanistan. We're talking about new Taliban also. And you have worked with Abdullah Abdullah, and he has been, according to the news, involved in this conversation that is going on about the new setup. How do you see, I'll start with this, how will you see Mr. Abdullah Abdullah's role? Because there are news being spread that he may be a very active part of this new setup. Is that correct?
Well, thank you again. Happy to be here with so many distinguished participants and discussants. I am sorry that I missed the first part because of early morning issues here. I tried to get up as early as I could and I did listen to the last two sessions, and I benefited quite a bit from all the insights of many of the participants that I actually personally know. In regards to your question, well, on one hand, Dr. Abdullah, ex-President Karzai, Mr. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Hamid Gilani, and a few other notable Afghan political personalities stayed in Kabul and are in Kabul. So obviously that made quite a difference in the fact that as the vacuum that was created for a few hours when Ashraf Ghani unexpectedly for the rest of us, we're not sure exactly how much planning went to that on his part, but abandoned Afghanistan and left the country unattended, without any word to the rest of the country and his colleagues, and took a few people with him. Obviously, there was a need initially for some of these individuals who have and continue to be active political players to raise their voice. And so if you remember, in the first few hours of uncertainty and the void that was created, ex-President Karzai, Dr. Abdullah, and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, I'm sure in consultation with others, announced that they are still in Afghanistan, they are in Kabul, they are in touch with the population. They raised their voice to say that they wanted to play a coordinating role, expecting the Taliban to enter the city. Nobody knew exactly what decision the Taliban were going to take as they were surrounding the city. But eventually they did enter the city, and as soon as they did, the discussions started with these individuals. And their first messages to this group of Afghan politicians basically was to, first of all, reassure them and reassure their constituencies, and also reassure the general population of Kabul and other parts of the country that as far as the Taliban were concerned, there's going to be an amnesty on one hand, a general amnesty. Number two, that they think that the war has ended. There's no more need for Afghans to fight each other. And they have reiterated that since then. Of course, there are pockets maybe of resistance here and there, but overall, their message was that this is the end of the war for the Afghans. And we haven't really heard much fighting going on across the country since then. And that they also wanted to send a message through these individuals to the general public that their lives, their security, their safety, their properties would be respected. I think these gentlemen echoed those views, and they have, for the past few days now, met on several occasions with different Taliban groups. And the focus has been mainly on safety and security, because there is some angst in the population about how we'll go about bringing order. Will it be the old Taliban style order that people remember from the 1990s, or is it going to be a different style of Taliban order that they will bring to the city and the country? So that has been the main involvement of these individuals. As of yesterday, we are hearing that a larger contingent of Taliban leaders have arrived in Kabul, especially a team led by Mullah Biradar, who had left Doha a few days ago, spent a few days in Kandahar for consultations, and is now in Kabul. So the expectation now is that Mullah Biradar and the Taliban leadership team that accompanies him will now, may now, we're not certain, but we think that they may engage Afghan politicians, including the individuals we talked about, in more substantive topics and subjects, such as an initial political compensation, whether the country is going to go through any type of interim transitional period, whether there will be an interim period within which there will be discussions about the current state of governance, as well as long-term political decisions that have to be taken about a new order, both political, economic, social, and all of that, taking into account that the Taliban are now a powerful entity to consider. So we are at that stage right now. As far as these individuals and Dr. Abdullah and President Karzai and others are concerned, they have had, I think, good and friendly and respectful discussions with both the Taliban, as well as in the past day or two with members of various constituencies and communities and their leaders. Today they had meetings with members of parliament, select members of parliament, some of whom are still in Kabul, men and women who came to Abdullah's house. And Abdullah's house has sort of become the gathering point for a lot of these discussions. And from what I hear, President Karzai spends most of his time in Abdullah's home because of issues with transportation between his old residence and where Dr. Abdullah lives. They have had meetings with elders and leaders from the Panjshir Valley, which is an indication that the Taliban would like to resolve the issues that have emerged in Panjshir in terms of the announcement made by former Vice President Amrullah Saleh, and also announcements that were made by Ahmad Massoud, the son of late Ahmad Shah Massoud. And so I think they seem to want some kind of dialogue or political arrangement, if possible. We don't know exactly what might happen on that front. So I will stop here. I hope that this has given you enough food for thought on what is happening.
Given us a detailed answer. So it looks like the talks are ongoing. At the same time, we are hearing talks of a new Taliban and we can see that they're taking great effort in ensuring that this is a new image. They are open to women education. They're open to women working in different sectors. As they've said, they can work as anchors, and everywhere they will be part of the government. But governing Afghanistan is a different task. We have achieved one milestone. The Taliban are there. The US is evacuated. A certain major players are out of the state. It looks like it's all people of Afghanistan who are talking about Afghanistan, and we're seeing this happening after a very long time. But then governing, you need economic aid. There are certain other factors you need, international acceptability. How are these challenges going to be catered? Do you think Taliban are capable of doing this within this inclusive setup? Who is essentially to be a part of this to ensure the stability in the times to come?
Well, the Taliban, as I said, are now the central force to deal with. And I am not sure exactly what type of consultations and discussions they had in Kandahar. I think whatever was discussed in Kandahar prior to Mullah Baradr's arrival in Kabul yesterday is very important. After everything that happened in Doha for the past 3 years, all the failed attempts to find a negotiated settlement, a political settlement for the Afghanistan war, most of it sabotaged by Ashraf Ghani and his clique and his supporters inside and outside Afghanistan, because very simply he wanted to stay on and be be the decision maker in terms of peace and war, and didn't want to give in. And he knew that the only way to achieve a political settlement was for Ashraf Ghani to either step down or resign or transfer power to an interim or transitional setup, which he did not want to do until the very last minute when he left. Now we are hearing things through the media that he actually was contemplating some kind of arrangement, something that came out through CNN yesterday and select reporters, which in my view does not hold a lot of water and is just a way to whitewash what has happened and to justify Ashraf Ghani's deeds. But most Afghans don't believe that. Most internationals who follow the issues think that he had many opportunities over the last 2 years, especially to do what was right for Afghanistan. But he didn't. So that is past now. As far as Taliban are concerned now, we have to wait. I think we're in a wait and see mode because we don't exactly know what the thinking is within the Taliban. There are a lot of messages that are being passed on to the Taliban from the international community. We constantly hear different countries, different leaders impress on them the fact that they need to have a broad-based approach towards Afghanistan, that they need to realize that Afghanistan has huge economic, humanitarian challenges on its hands, and they need assistance from the international community, that we need to unblock all the monies that have been blocked in the past 48 hours, that we need to make sure that we have, again, a functional government to the extent possible that can provide the services that are essential for the Afghan people, and that we go back to a sense of normalcy. And so that is the message that they have been hearing for the past few days, not only from inside the country and from Afghan politicians and constituencies, but also from the international community. We have to wait and see exactly what their response is going to be. Yes, we do know what they have said over the last 2-3 years. On occasions, they have given us a taste of what their thinking might be on power sharing, on relations with the region, on relations with the world, on the needs of Afghanistan, on human rights, women's rights, etc. But it has been very shallow. It has been very, I would say, basic and not deep enough. The Taliban have a very peculiar way of managing information and sharing information about their own policies. I'm not sure if it's a reflection of the fact that they don't have policies totally defined yet, that they still have issues within their own structures, that there are different constituencies within the Taliban who are pushing for different agendas, or whether they are doing it as a tactic. and waiting to achieve certain goals before they take the next step. For example, one of their primary goals right now, obviously, is international recognition. And so, in order to get international recognition, they will say what needs to be said to the extent that it needs to be said, and may not go beyond that. But the international community and Afghans in particular want to hear more. And so the Taliban at some point now will have to say more, and will have to not only say it, but they also would have to put it in action, and they would have to turn it into policy in actionable, practical terms, make sure that they deliver on their promises. If they want a broad-based approach, they have to be clear as to how, what kind of structures, how is power going to be shared, and where does authority reside, who has authority over decision making, whether it's domestic policy or foreign policy or anything. So all of these things have to be sorted out as soon as possible.
So as far as you are aware of the process of talks, are they taking place in a cordial, conducive environment, or are there some major points of contention? For instance, there were reports that the name of Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan was not acceptable for an all-inclusive government, but Taliban then declared this name, and many stakeholders who were part of Doha talks were not were not part of that process when they declared that. Then there have been certain reports about protests against the flag. What will be the main points where you think these talks could stall? These are the major points.
I'll be honest, I don't think that we are at that stage of specificity yet. I think that we still are dealing with higher level cosmetic issues. I think the Taliban, at some point, I hope, even though they, as I said, first of all, it's clear now that there are different tendencies and different mindsets within the Taliban. Obviously, it's a large organization. It has different components, different backgrounds, and I'm sure a diversity of views exists within the Taliban as well, in the same way that it exists within Afghanistan, and it has to be taken into account. The same way that the Taliban have to take into account the diversity of Afghanistan in all its forms. As far as specific issues are concerned, I think that the Taliban are also very methodologic. So they use methods and methodologies that are very structured. They take everything one step at a time, and they move forward. And we saw this during the discussions and the negotiations or semi-negotiations that took place in Doha. Regardless of what one faction or another faction may do, I think that until and unless these political discussions start, we won't know whether an emirate, for example, is an issue or not. We won't know if a flag is going to become an issue or not. We won't know if some of these symbolic issues are going to create tension or not. I think that the Taliban are pretty clear about a few things. I mean, obviously, Sharia is very important for them, and so we will have to address that issue when it comes up. Even though in the current Afghan constitution, Sharia is somewhat incorporated. The issues that have to do with I think at the end of the day, it boils down to political power and authority in decision making. Are they going to go for an Amir or Mu'mineen, as they have so far? Are they going to create an Iranian type of structure, but the Sunni version in Afghanistan? Are they going to adopt certain structures and examples from the current system? Are they going to introduce some new ones? And what are the others going to contribute? How is the rest of the political structure going to play this and will they have enough? Will they have enough space to share their thoughts and actually negotiate as equal partners? So all of these are very difficult questions that will have to be addressed soon. The other, obviously, the flip side to all of this is Taliban are not amenable to power sharing, that the Taliban would like to go back to a 1990s style monopoly of power. The Taliban only want to adhere to their version, their interpretation of Sharia and impose it on Afghans as they did in the past. So that's the flip side, and something that I think will become very problematic, both for the Taliban, for Afghan society, for the region, and for the world. And they might, by doing so, they are going to surely isolate themselves and isolate the country. And they're going to be seen by some as a pariah state, and they will be sanctioned, in my view, if they take that route. The more flexibility in accommodation they show will definitely be to their benefit and to the benefit of Afghanistan and to the benefit of the region as well.
So when you look at how the US has responded to the situation, in particular, there was a speech by President Joe Biden, and it seemed like that he was focusing on the failure of Afghan government and the Afghan forces. Then we saw a lot of criticism on President Joe Biden from the former president, Donald Trump, but they were one point was similar among the two of them, on which both of them agreed, which was again the conduct of Mr. Ashraf Ghani. And how do you respond to that criticism?
Well, the current American administration obviously has two sets of challenges on its hand right now in regards to Afghanistan. Immediately, it's the evacuation drama that is ongoing in Kabul. I expect that, and I hope that without any hitches or glitches, it will be completed within the next, hopefully 2-3 weeks at the most. And I hope it doesn't become a point of contention. The other issue for the United States, obviously, is what to do next and how to deal once it's withdrawn, fully withdrawn from Afghanistan by either August 31st or September 11th. How to treat Afghanistan? They've already made some pronouncements and made some statements as to what they expect of the Taliban. It's the same as usual in terms of counterterrorism, their commitments and their pledges that they made within the agreement that they signed in 2020. Counterterrorism, human rights, women's rights issues, being broad-based and accommodating and inclusive as possible of other political forces and constituencies in Afghanistan, and also playing a positive role in the region and globally. So I think that's the package. And next week the G7, I think, is going to endorse a common package. I think they're going to try to approach Afghanistan from a single vantage point, and make sure that they're unified on their approach towards Afghanistan and the Taliban from here on. So we'll see that next week through the G7. Now, the rest of the international community, of course, we're talking about the neighboring countries who have a critical role to play, and we're watching very carefully what is happening in Afghanistan. And then regional countries beyond the neighbors, and obviously other powers in Asia and Europe and others in the Arab world who have a stake in Afghanistan. There you have multiple viewpoints, and you have different dimensions of interest in policy making. So it becomes a bit more complex, and each country is going to decide for itself as to how to deal with the Taliban and with the Afghanistan issue. And the issue of recognition is going to be obviously an important one. Now, again, everything depends on how the Taliban are going to present themselves and their policies and their viewpoints to the Afghan people and to the international community over the next few days. I think that they're waiting for this evacuation problem to be resolved before they make an announcement. I think they're going to wait for all foreign troops to be out of Afghanistan before they can then announce that political negotiations, or a political dispensation, or a political setup is going to take shape. So we still have a few more days, and I'm sure that they're going to use these next few days in Kabul to have as many consultations and discussions as possible.
So, Mr. Samad, you have a very good eye on Afghan issues. You've been part of this, of everything. How do you see the future of Afghanistan in the next decade? Where do you see Afghanistan?
All depends on the decisions that will be made in the next few days. As I said, we have limited scenarios ahead. We have a best case scenario and worst case scenario. The case scenario is for Taliban to show flexibility and be accommodating, and to show some level of openness that they did not have in the 1990s, whilst they still maintain, their core beliefs, which have to be respected in any case. The same way that we have to respect the core beliefs of other Afghan constituencies in terms of politics and the role of religion and social and economic strategies that the country should adopt. So we have best case scenarios, and then you go down the line toward the worst case scenario, which again is a model that we experienced in the 1990s with some, maybe just a little bit of adjustment here and there, but the same kind of mindset, the same kind of worldview, the same kind of governance model that would be, I think, very hurtful for Afghanistan and would be challenging for the region and the world.
So we see new development in Afghanistan, and we're mostly focused on Taliban taking charge. But there's another part to that development, which is USA leaving the region, and that is up to 20 years. What are the implications of that part of the equation?
Well, we others have talked about where the U.S. made mistakes and where we all, at some level, did good or bad or miscalculated the situation in Afghanistan. Especially Afghans have to also do their work, and as the U.S. and Americans will have to do theirs, Europeans and others in their neighborhood as well. I mean, even Pakistan has a lot to reevaluate in terms of the policies over the years. But I think that as far as the region is concerned, we are going to we have to again wait for what the Taliban do. I think that it has changed. It is changing regional realignment. It already has. If you go back 20 years ago, almost all countries were united in trying to bring about change in Afghanistan the way that it happened post 9/11. Over time, that approach started weakening, and it took on different forms. The longer the U.S. military presence lasted, the longer the investment in Afghanistan on the military side, the more reactions we saw from the region in different ways. Some countries started playing proxy wars again, using Afghanistan. The Americans got bogged down in a way, in a quagmire. they found out that they were taking side in an Afghan civil war situation that had not been resolved fully. And so then China obviously is not the same China that was 20 years ago. And China is looking at geoeconomic priorities, at its intention to connect itself to the rest of Asia and Europe and Africa, and economically speaking, including Pakistan and the CPEC and BRI projects that have to be implemented. So China has an interest in seeing a stable and peaceful Afghanistan. It probably doesn't care too much as to what the political setup is going to be. And the Russians obviously have their issues with threats that the threat assessments from the Russians in terms of terrorism and drugs is serious enough that they have shifted and have obviously had a dialogue with the Taliban for several years now. Pakistan is a very important neighbor, and we need to resolve our issues with Pakistan, I hope, as soon as possible. We need to address them. We need to find solutions to our traditional and historic issues that have created mistrust between the two countries. I know that in the past 20 years, Afghan governments have tried to do that, and Pakistani governments have tried as well, but it never went away. So that level of mistrust always existed. We need to work on that from now on. And with Iran, obviously, they have issues that have to do with America, which is no longer going to be a major player soon. And they obviously have issues that have to do with refugees, drugs, and terrorism that I think the Taliban have tried to bring up with them. And so the Taliban have actually successfully been able to engage at least the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, and obviously they have had good relations with Pakistan for a long time. And good relations obviously doesn't mean that they think alike on all issues or that they see eye to eye on all issues. But there are fewer problems in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Omar Sarmad. In particular, what you said about reevaluation of policies, we see a clear stance from Pakistan that we have reevaluated and we have learned a lot from the past, but we need to see if our regional other players are willing to do the same. But having said that, a very thought-provoking session. Thank you so much, and I'll hand over to Muhammad Asrar Hassan now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fereeha Idrees, and thank you, Ambassador Omar Sarmad.
Thank you.